It had always been a dream of mine to own a peaceful lakefront home, somewhere quiet, away from the chaos of the city, where I could fish in the mornings and kayak at sunset. After years of saving and planning, I finally found the perfect place. A beautiful 2-story house nestled among tall pine trees with a dock that reached out into a pristine lake. The property listing specifically highlighted lake access as a private feature, and it was clearly marked on the deed. I fell in love instantly and closed the deal within a month. The first few days were nothing short of magical. Every morning, I drink my coffee on the dock, letting the early sunlight dance off the water. The lake was calm, serene, and I felt like I had finally stepped into the life I'd always envisioned. But then I met her, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, Karen. She introduced herself in a tone that felt more like an interrogation than a friendly hello. Karen was the president of the local HOA, and she made sure to remind me of that multiple times during our first 5-minute conversation. It wasn't long before she began commenting on how outsiders didn't always understand the rules of their community. I didn't think much of it at first, just another overzealous neighbor trying to sound important. That changed a week later. Had just pushed my kayak into the water from my dock when Karen stormed over, yelling from her golf cart like she was patrolling enemy territory. She told me I was violating HOA rules by trespassing on the lake. I explained calmly that the lakefront was part of my property and I had every right to use it. But she was adamant. She claimed the HOA had exclusive access and that all recreational use had to go through them, requiring approval and a seasonal fee. I was stunned that it didn't make any sense. Why would I need permission to use a part of my own land? She even threatened me with fines and legal action if I continued to ignore the rules. I didn't want drama. I just wanted peace. But something about the way she barked those orders made my gut twist. Something wasn't right. So I decided to dig deeper. Karen's threats weren't empty. Within days of our confrontation at the lake, I began receiving official-looking notices taped to my front door. One demanded that I cease and desist all unauthorized lake activity. Another included a fine of $250 for illegal use of a controlled property. The last one threatened legal escalation if I didn't comply. Each notice was signed by Karen herself under the banner of the HOA. The most frustrating part? None of these so-called rules were mentioned in the paperwork I signed when buying the home. I combed through my closing documents, the deed, and the neighborhood covenants. Nowhere, and I mean nowhere, did it say the HOA had control over the lake. My deed clearly showed my property line extending into the water. So how was Karen claiming authority over something she had no right to? I reached out to a few neighbors, hoping they might clarify things. What I found was a mix of fear and resignation. Several had been similarly warned for using the lake, and one couple had even stopped bringing their paddle boat out entirely because they couldn't afford the mounting fines. They all echoed the same thing. Don't mess with Karen. It's not worth the headache. But to me, it was worth it. I wasn't about to let someone bully me off my own land. I decided to do what most people in that neighborhood never dared. I started researching the HOA's legal rights. I began at the county recorder's office, pulling plat maps, easements, and original development plans. What I found absolutely floored me. The lake wasn't owned by the HOA at all. It was designated as a shared natural resource with private access for any deed-holding lakefront homeowner. In fact, there were old utility and drainage easements that legally prevented the HOA from claiming ownership. There were also court precedents in similar cases across the state where HOAs had lost badly trying to enforce authority over land they didn't own. I printed everything. Maps, deeds, legal clauses, the whole file. I even found archived newsletters from the early days of the HOA where the board acknowledged they didn't control the lake. The truth was crystal clear. Karen wasn't following any rules. She was making them up, and most people had been too scared or tired to fight back. But I wasn't like most people with a folder full of documents and a fire lit under me. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. Karen had been bullying the entire neighborhood for years, using fake rules and fear to control something that was never hers to begin with. I wasn't just going to stand up for myself. I was going to expose her for everyone to see. I started by writing a detailed post on the community's private HOA Facebook group. I included screenshots of my deed showing lake access, maps from the county office proving the lake wasn't HOA property, and even snippets from the HOA's original founding documents that confirmed they had no jurisdiction over the water. I also shared copies of the notices Karen had left on my door and pointed out how none of them referenced any real legal basis. It was all smoke and mirrors. Within minutes, the post exploded. Dozens of comments flooded in. Some people were shocked. Others were furious. Residents who had silently suffered through Karen's threats for years finally found the courage to speak up. One woman shared that Karen made her teenage son cry after yelling at him for fishing. Another man revealed he'd paid over $800 in fines over the years and was now realizing he never owed a dime. As the conversation spiraled, I got a direct message from a local investigative reporter. Someone had shared my post outside the group, and now the media was interested. After a quick phone call and a review of the evidence, the reporter scheduled an interview with me for a weekend segment titled The Lakefront Lie. The day after that interview aired, things reached a boiling point. The HOA called an emergency town hall meeting, and I was formally invited. Karen stood up in front of the room, trying to defend herself, claiming everything was a misunderstanding, and that she was just enforcing order. But by then, the damage was done. People were asking hard questions, and Karen had no real answers. I stood up, holding my folder of proof, and calmly explained everything again, this time face to face with the entire neighborhood watching. No yelling, no drama. Just the truth. By the time I sat down, the room had turned on her. Karen didn't speak another word. And for the first time since moving in, I felt like the community was finally waking up. The fallout from the town hall meeting was swift and unforgiving. Within days, residents were calling for an emergency vote to remove Karen as HOA president. The evidence was too overwhelming to ignore, and the trust she had spent years manipulating was completely shattered. People were angry not just because she had lied about the lake, but because she had bullied, intimidated, and financially penalized innocent homeowners under the guise of fake authority. The city got involved shortly after the story aired on local news. A municipal investigator reviewed the HOA's claims, examined the documents I provided, and interviewed several residents who had been fined or harassed by Karen. The verdict was clear. The HOA had absolutely no legal ownership of the lake or its access points. The city issued a formal notice to the HOA board, demanding they cease all enforcement related to the lake and refund any fines collected under false pretenses. Karen, faced with mounting pressure and legal consequences, resigned before the emergency vote could even take place. No apology, no explanation. She quietly disappeared from the HOA group chats, stopped attending meetings, and put her house up for sale a few weeks later. Just like that, the reign of the Lake Karen was over. A new election was held to restructure the HOA board, and for the first time in years, real community members, people who actually cared about fairness and transparency, were voted in. I was even asked to join, but I politely declined. I hadn't moved here to govern anyone. I just wanted peace and to make sure no one else had to go through what I did. The best part? The lake was finally ours again. Neighbors brought out kayaks and paddle boards, kids splashed in the shallows, and people fished from their docks without fear. It became the center of the community it was always meant to be. I'd walk down to the water in the evenings and smile, knowing that truth had won not just for me, but for everyone. Sometimes, standing up to a bully doesn't just change your life, it changes an entire neighborhood. All it takes is one person willing to say, "This isn't right," and follow that voice with action. I never planned to be that person, but I'm glad I was.